Hi, you're watching theAnalysis-news, and I'm Talia Baroncelli. You're watching part 2 of my interview with American priest Matthew Fox. We're discussing his newly published book called Trump and the MAGA Movement as Antichrist. If you'd like to support the work that we do, you can go to our website, theanalysis.news, hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen, and get onto our mailing list. That way you're always up to date every time we publish a new episode. You can like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or on other podcast streaming services such as Apple or Spotify, and share the show with your friends and family if you'd like to. See you in a bit with Matthew Fox. Joining me now is Matthew Fox. He's an American Episcopal priest as well as theologian. He was formerly a member of the Dominican order within the Catholic Church, and it was actually Cardinal Ratzinger who led an inquiry, a so-called inquisition, if you will, into Matthew Fox's writings and his work, and decided to silence him and then kick him out of the Catholic Church in 1993. So Matthew Fox has written numerous books, 43 books on culture and spirituality, including Original Blessing, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, Spirituality Named Compassion, and The Reinvention of Work. So much of his writings are characterized by a pro-environmental, climate-conscious Christian spirituality. He's here to speak about his new book, which was actually just published, and it's called Trump and the MAGA Movement as Antichrist. Thanks so much for joining me today, Matthew.
Thank you, Talia. Good to be with you.
Well, in your book, you also mention Project 2025 and ProPublica, which is an investigative journalism outfit. They recently published some of the secret training videos of Project 2025, and one of the videos showcased former Trump official Bethany Kozma. She used to work for USAID, and she was talking about how it was necessary to get rid of all mention of climate change in federal documents. This is also outlined in Project 2025's mandate for leadership. So they don't even see climate change or the climate crisis as being a threat to society. They don't even want to acknowledge it. They see climate change as simply a set of policies which are trying to create energy scarcity, and that, these policies of energy scarcity are benefiting certain elites. So they have a completely different view when it comes to climate change. Why don't we speak about Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation and who plays a huge role in 2025. Can you speak about his ties to Opus Dei? And then we'll also get to Steve Bannon.
Well, again, there is this fascist wing of the Catholic Church. And Steve Bannon, who you mentioned, Leo Leopold, who's very effective, who really gave us this on the Supreme Court that we currently have. All 6 of the extremists on it were nominated by him and cleared by him. And he's within the bowels of the Heritage Foundation. And that's where Kevin Roberts is on the same team. And also these people, these far right and many of them very rich Catholics, have taken over a lot of the Catholic education. They're investing, if you will, in Catholic schools. And of course, the Catholic Church has undergone a tremendous economic collapse in my lifetime because of the pedophile priest thing. And so there's this vacuum, and they're filling it, or trying to. And they chum up to a lot of bishops because the bishops kind of have to pay the bills. And these bishops are not looking at it from the point of view of justice and injustice, but just from the point of view, who can give me some money to fill our coffers? And so the fact is that the Catholic bishops had for 2 years, their head person was an Opus Dei bishop from Los Angeles. And it's just amazing, really, that the head of the bishops for Opus Dei, because Opus Dei is a fascist, literally a fascist organization. The founder was a fascist priest in Spain in the 1920s, and who became very close to Franco and all the rest. So, and I write about that in my book, The Pope's War. So the impact of those people with money and influence, and some of them very skilled. And of course, within that coterie also, of course, is the Koch brothers, who are not from the Catholic, but from the Protestant wing, if you will. But as you start looking at where the money is flowing and where it's flowing, who it's coming from, there's strong ideologies in many of these billionaires, and they love to wrap it in a so-called Christianity or something else, or Catholicism. But these same Catholic people are very anti-Pope Francis, and he's come after some of them. For example, Cardinal Burke, who was kind of their overall champion within the ecclesial structure. One of the first things Pope Francis did was to fire him from being head of the Knights of Malta. Now, the Knights of Malta is where Leonard Leo, where he hangs out. That's his source. And theologically, these people are Neanderthals. They, like Escriva himself, hated the Vatican Council too, and so do all these others. They resented, and they think all the answers were, let's make Catholicism great again by backing up to before Vatican II, because Vatican II called for justice. And out of Vatican II, the liberation theology movement was born, and so forth. And the creation spirituality movement, too, that I'm part of. So, again, America is, what can I say? It's spiritually, religiously illiterate. By that I mean it's been calling fundamentalism Christianity in the newspapers and TV, and for decades they've identified Christianity with fundamentalism. And in fact, fundamentalists are not, what should I say, the plurality of Christians in America. And Vatican II, it was not fundamentalist. It was about ecumenism, and it was about justice, and so forth. And it set things in motion. But of course, two popes followed that were very much in the far right wing corner of Catholicism, and they destroyed liberation theology deliberately, working with Ronald Reagan and CIA under Ronald Reagan. And I've proven all that in my book on the Pope's War. And they set out, the CIA and the entire community of national security in America under Reagan, set out to destroy liberation theology in South America. And they put out a document, the Santa Fe document, about how to do it. But they realized they couldn't do it in totality, but what they could do was they could split the church. So that's what they did, and they did it very effectively. And they went to Rome with, and by they I mean the head of the CIA, who was a far right-wing Catholic, Casey. He went to Rome with, I think, 29 trips with satchels full of cash to give to Pope John Paul II, to give to Solidarity. But in exchange, Pope John Paul II and Ratzinger, who was his hatchet man, went after liberation theology in South America. So they did split the church.
And also after Aristide in Haiti, right?
That too, yeah. And of course, even Archbishop Romero, now declared a saint, who was martyred. The Vatican hated Romero. Romero was too close to the people, and he took on the military in El Salvador. So, and yet this Pope Francis, he canonized him, and thereby kind of opened the door to a realization that the values pronounced in Vatican II, which also gave birth to liberation theology, were the values of an authentic Christian like Oscar Romero.
Well, the dark money you refer to is incredibly important, because you were speaking about Citizens United in your book, which is a decision passed in, I think, 2008, which allowed for all sorts of undocumented, untransparent transfers of money to political groups, to political parties. And so it's much harder to track who is actually giving all of this money. So you mentioned Leonard Leo and how, he was from the Federalist Society, and he was, picking or sort of suggesting which judges Trump should appoint to the Supreme Court. And of course, he favored John Roberts, Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, who are all incredibly corrupt. They've also narrowed the definition of corruption in the United States context by essentially making it legal to bribe someone on a political scale, saying that, political gifts or gifts of money are not bribery, and that they don't constitute corruption. So the definition of corruption has been changed, the legal definition at least. And, there are all sorts of instances of corruption by the, as you call them, unsupreme court. So, where is this money actually coming from? I mean, you mentioned Opus Dei and Steve Bannon, but where is the actual money coming from?
Well, remember, too, they've also redefined immunity of a president. And it's not just those three, but they were first, but the most recent three also were handpicked by Leonard Leo, who, by the way, is frequently in pictures with the sugar daddy who gives so much money to Clarence Thomas and keeps taking him on vacations that we learn about only years after they've happened, that Thomas, for some reason, never mentions on his taxes, I guess.
Yeah, you didn't think it was an important point to
mention.
Like
you point out that 2008 was Citizens United. That was John Roberts' doing. It precedes Trump, of course, and that's my point, that Trump is not everything. He's just kind of a very successful articulator and bringing of the masses into this whirlwind of corruption that is becoming clearer day by day. And also now Leonard Leo is a billionaire himself. A billionaire gave him $1.6 billion a couple of years ago, just to straight cash like that. And now that he's been so successful in taking over the Supreme Court, he is now applying it to congressional races and so forth. He wants to do to Congress what he's accomplished in the Supreme Court. So, these people have to be watched and watched carefully.
I was asking about where the money is coming from, because
where it's coming from, yeah. Well,
they're huge donors.
Huge donors, yeah. Well, again, the Koch brothers have been huge donors in all these projects for decades, and that's well buttressed by facts and books even. Of course, one of them is now deceased. And of course, their big thing was to fight environmental laws, because they were making their money in Texas, oil and other things, and they didn't want the bother with the environmental laws. So that's the thing, that that we now have 1,000 billionaires in America, and some of them have a conscience and are trying to do good things, but some of them have a project. They have a goal, and a lot of it is to deconstruct democracy. And this fellow who gave Vance, the vice president on the Republican side, $15 million for his Senate campaign, he has declared that democracy for him is dead. Democracy and freedom, he says, are incompatible. By freedom, he means the freedom of a billionaire to do whatever advances their goals of making more money on their billions. So there advances their goals of greed.
You're referring to Peter Thiel, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah, funded J.D. Vance's rise.
Right. And, he has a philosophy. He's honest about putting it out there. But he thinks that democracy is passé. And because it interferes with his goals. And, of course, I think Musk feels the same way. So, and then when you can buy half the Congress, and because of the Citizens United gamemanship, and remember, behind Citizens United is this amazing philosophical statement that corporations are persons. And I just think that's so amazing, because Chief Justice Roberts claims to be a Catholic too. And that's pretty far from Catholic philosophy. Catholic philosophy has been pretty strong on what a person means, and it's never been defined as corporations before, except by this particular Supreme Court. But once you define corporations as people, you're making a lot of trouble, because for one thing, corporations are immortal. People die. We die, but corporations keep going. They keep going. And so we've not only given them immortality, we give them the rights of persons. And that's quite a jump. And so there's a lot of chicanery going on. And, you do see some bright senators in the judicial committees who are standing up. And I cite several of them in my book, of course, to what's going on, and have kind of figured out how we could solve it if we had the will to solve it. But there too, I think the whole mega structure, which begins with denial, and denial is a decision. Meister Eckhart, the great mystic of the Middle Ages, said, God is the denial of denial. And I just love that. I mean, he could have just said God is denial, is the opposite of denial. No, God is the denial of denial. So that means if you're in a context of denial, like where one whole party in America is about climate change, or pretends to be up front, but if you're in denial that God is nowhere in the picture, the truth is nowhere in the picture, then you can do whatever you want. And of course, that is a big part of the tradition of the archetype of the Antichrist, that Satan is the father of lies. And when you have a president who's been counted to have told over 35,000 lies as a president, that kind of feeds the archetype too, you see. That, all politicians lie to a point, I think, but not to the extraordinary achievement of that particular successful politician. And that's one more example of the powers of Antichrist that are to be found. And I want to point out too, like I'm using the word Antichrist, and I said I trying to take it back from the fundamentalists. But remember, Luther used it. It was very big to Luther. In the year 1520, he started to use it of the Curia in Rome. But then as things got more tough for him, he also applied it to the papacy. From 1520 till he died, I think that was 1545, 25 years, he was using this term Antichrist very strongly. And then the other reformers, Zwingli, Calvin, John Knox, got on board and used it too. So there's a precedent for what I'm talking about. Applying the archetype, it's an archetype of the Antichrist to cultural moments and cultural movements, and heads of these movements is there's a precedent for this. And of course, when it was used in the first century in the book of Revelations, it was applied to the Roman Empire. It was out literally throwing Christians to the lions. Those are true stories. And some emperors were doing that. And that's where this whole archetype was applied in the first century in the Bible itself. But of course, they got it from the book of Daniel and so forth in ancient Israel. So again, archetypes, Jung says archetypes arise when we need them. And I'm saying that to summarize the evil of Citizens United and misogyny and denial of climate change, which is matricide because killing our Mother Earth, and all these other issues that I'm talking about, to summarize it, we have a language for it. And that language is Antichrist. And it is a powerful archetype, as Carolyn Meese points out in her foreword to my book. She's quite a student of archetypes.
And your chapter on Jesus as well. I mean, you speak about Jesus' opposition to the Roman Empire, and a lot of people today would say that Jesus was basically a Marxist. I mean, he was concerned with the well-being of everyone and didn't want there to be huge inequalities in society. So just one final question on J.D. Vance.
But of course, Karl Marx comes out of the same tradition as Jesus, the Jewish prophetic tradition. So, of course, they had a lot in common, that justice matters, and that compassion means justice, not just feeling sorry for people.
Yeah, and you also speak about what you mean by justice.
Creating structures where love is possible, creating structures that limit greed, put guardrails on greed, so that love and fairness are possible.
But, I mean, this seems to be completely at odds with what J.D. Vance is talking about, because J.D. Vance also has his own vision of Christianity, and he's, as you mentioned, funded by Peter Thiel, a billionaire, and he seems to have a very distorted view of Christianity. How do you identify J.D. Vance's view, and would he be more along the lines of Steve Bannon and that sort of Catholicism, or how do you characterize J.D. Vance?
Well, very much so. I wrote an article in my daily meditations a few weeks ago comparing J.D. Vance's Catholicism to Joe Biden's, because Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are definitely Vatican II Catholics. They listen to what was being said then about shifting more into the arena of justice making. And, they did something about it in their lives and in their vocations as politicians. And, I commend them for that. It doesn't mean they were right all the time.
Well, Joe Biden, who calls himself a Catholic, is currently enabling Israel's genocidal war against the Palestinians. So I wouldn't call him a holy man either.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely his biggest mistake, is that he's been played by Netanyahu time and time again. And I just don't know why he hasn't stepped away from that. But again, we all fall short. That's the point. But what are your basic North Stars, your basic values? And I think his can be said to be many of the values that Vatican II is trying to talk about to Catholics. Now, Vance has come on board, you see, in this time where there is this strong, not in the sense of numbers, but in the sense of finance, this strong right wing, I would call it neo-fascist wing of the Catholic Church. And those are the ones who have taken him under his wing. And, he's only been Catholic for 5 years, but it is a strange Catholicism, but you see it in these movements I've been talking about that came to strength under Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI, when they wanted to destroy base communities and liberation theology in South America, and they substituted Opus Dei. So they literally declared all these bishops and cardinals in South America to be Opus Dei, and many bishops now in America too. And this has really tainted the church, so that in North America, Pope Francis himself has talked about how conservative American bishops are, how they're actually, I think he actually said they're committing suicide. So he has a running fight with these people. And of course, he just excommunicated one of their heroes, who was the Archbishop who was nuncio here, which is, the diplomat from the Vatican for 6 years, this guy was, which means he was appointing bishops for 6 years. He had the say, the final yay and no about bishops, and so he had tremendous influence. And this guy is now, because he denied Vatican II also. So it's very unusual to excommunicate an archbishop, especially one who's been a diplomat, a nuncio in many countries over many decades. But that's how, what should I say, fed up Pope Francis is with this corner of the church, which is overly represented in the United States, overly represented because of the appointments of young bishops of that philosophy. Is kind of like the appointments of these young members of the Supreme Court who could be there forever, carrying on the ideologies of Donald Trump and his companions.
Well, Matthew Fox, it's been really fascinating speaking to you and speaking to you about your new book, which was just published, and I hope people read it. I thought it was really interesting, and we didn't get to speak about Thomas Aquinas, but I think he also, or his writings and philosophy and his attempts to reconcile reason and science and faith and those things, I think also played a huge role in how you approach this particular topic and how you wrote about it. So I thought it was really a fascinating read, and I hope people read it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. He has some powerful things to say about politicians and about tyrants and about democracy. And he has this one amazing insight. He says, a politician must know more about the human soul than a doctor knows about the human body. It's an amazing statement. And when you think about it, Hitler knew the soul of the Germans in the 1930s very, very well. He could appeal to its sense of resentment and so forth. And I think Donald Trump, too, is very gifted in reading the soul of wounded people in America and getting them stirred up and providing them with a language that is hostile and really laden with hatred, but that appeals not to the better angels, but to the worse angels, which we call demons, bad spirits of people. I think he's very good at that. And we should not deny. And that's part of the Antichrist. Like in this great fresco painting we're talking about, a lot of people were listening to him. This was a popular guy. And there are even pictures of his doing miracles in the background, raising someone from the dead and so forth. That is the tradition of the Antichrist, that he has powers. And these powers can be very effective, and they mesmerize people. And there's something fascinating, as Jung says, there's something fascinating about a negative archetype. It draws people. It's alluring. And Jung applies that to the Antichrist, that there's a fascination there. And I think the media has given Trump so many free rides because they're allured by it too. And of course, they're allured by their bottom line, because the more people that look at these strange goings on, the more money they make. But I think that Tim Walsh, by calling it weird, it's weirdness draws people to television at times. And I think that is part of what's going on here. And a previous name for that might have been allurement or
Well, I think maybe next time we could speak about how to give people an alternative, because Hillary Clinton famously called some Trump supporters a basket of deplorables. And I think it's accurate to label some of them as, racist and fascist and the Antichrist, but some people are just, average people who have been, who have experienced such grievances and economic despair and just all sorts of disillusionment with elite politicians and the government. So, and of course, overdoses of opioids.
I don't apply those words, and I'm talking about I'm not talking about individuals either. That's why I talk about the archetype.
Mm-hmm.
There's this languaging that that tells the truth of things that we need to look at, as Jung says, and as you started out with our conversation. That without looking at it, it metastasizes. And it's not just an American problem. Obviously, the rise of fascism is happening in many countries around the world because modern liberalism and neoliberalism, we're in a postmodern time, and we don't have the politics for a postmodern time. We don't have the structures. We don't have an education or academia for a postmodern time. And we don't have religion for a postmodern time. But what you could look at this as something negative, or you could say, hey, what an invitation to give birth to something new. And Pete Buttigieg talked last night about a new politics. And I think that's really what can be born out of what I see happening in the Democratic Party today. And with someone like Harris and Wells as leaders, I think it's possible. And bringing joy back is very important, because joy, after all, is related to love. And if you talk about joy, you're also talking about love. And there's not a lot of either in the Antichrist movement today or in the past.
Matthew Fox, thanks so much for joining us. And thank you for watching theAnalysis.news. See you next time.